Hi everyone, my name is Isabel Solger and I will be talking about current assessment issues regarding English language learners. So our objectives for today are here. We're going to talk about historical accounts, the importance within elementary education, implementations, and then my personal reflection. So the history behind this historical issue is a few cases back. Throughout the years, we've been in a country where bilingual education was given, and then there was segregation of schools within time periods, and bilingual education was then taken away in 1923. 34 states required that schools only teach in English. There was a lot of different movements, and most recently, in 2001, No Child Left Behind was brought up, and that changed English as a second language into a instruction education program. In 2019, the most recent Arizona Governor Doug Ducey signed the Senate Bill 1014 into law, and this eliminates the 4-hour mandated block of English language learner instruction. So I want to talk about computer tests. Evaluating computer-based testing is a benefit and it has its pros and its cons like every other test, but there has been evidence regarding that these tests are more effective for both teachers and students. So the definition of English language learners are students whose first language is not English. This includes students who have limited English proficiency. Some potential problems that they face is that they tend to score lower on different kinds of tests. It's difficult for them to take exams from pencil and paper, and their cognitive load is lower compared to others. Evidence and analyzing data is very important, and gathering sufficient data has been a dilemma within some school districts. And right here in this article, it talked about how you can, as a teacher, partake in that and change that into watching their eye tracking, such as using the computer. Testing can do that with its recordings, verbal protocols, interactions, and notating their response and how long it takes them to take it. Some three potential advantages of these computer-based testings is number one, they're more effectively delivered accommodations. It allows educators to gather better data to later evaluate, and it gives and provides exact track of how much and what degree is actually used and needed. Accommodations are in two different kinds. They are intended to reduce those language barriers, and category one is direct linguistic support, and category two is indirect linguistic support. There was a couple of questions asking how much if they use them, and yes, they do. And then another one is if ELs or take longer than non-ELs, and the accommodations do not imply or give the English language learners more time to take the exams. I found it interesting how English language learners would have the ability to select one or both accommodation types when needed, such as if they were taking a English language exam, they could click the highlighted word and it would remain open for them upon selecting it as long as they needed it. Some conclusions that was brought up from this article is that when students do not access accommodations, that they may help reduce the language barriers, the scores they receive on content area skills may be less accurate. Accommodations, adequate placement, testing, evaluations, support, and motivation will help the ELL students progress, and that's what we potentially want in the end. So going on, we're going to talk about implementations of testing and some response to intervention. A big influence is information. A lot of teachers and people who work with English language learners do not have the adequate information given. Student school history is important and valuable for both the school district, family, and teachers. This provides attended information, additional information, records, programs that they might have been placed in, and some factors that affect their school performance. So what you need to keep a record and to fix the problem is coordinating and collecting the data, having the student profile, having their enrollment history, significant events that influence their performance, Oral results, not just literacy assessments, include the family and their background information, and interventions that may be needed for accommodation. In 2015, the Every Student Succeeds Act requires school districts to convert all of their electronic records into electronic records, not just pencil written out. Factors that may affect, and not just ELL students, but any type of student we need to remind ourselves of, is serious illness, abuse, divorce, treatment, house problems, and other factors that may play into influencing their school education. There's two types of assessments, L1 and L2. These are critical. They help affect planning, instruction, and allow the teacher to determine decisions later on. L1 assessments help establish their proficiency if it's adequate with their age and grade level or developmental levels. L2 assessments indicate the state in which the English language learner is at. Common mistakes that have been made, such as using Laurel testing or any kind of placement, sometimes they are placed in the wrong, um, or they are misclassified. Right here it talks about how a panel of professionals reviewed participating students, folders, records, and special education referrals. The panel concluded that 77%, 34 out of 44 participants, may have been misclassified. So we need to use the data correctly before making educational decisions, especially if it's regards of special education placing. Student performance should be compared to other ELL learners who have similar cultural, linguistic, and educational backgrounds. Family information can also be considered to avoid misplacing of disability. Next, we already talk about high-stake testing. This article searched 3 years of data from Tennessee Department of Education, and this was an investigation that examined ELLs during U.S. history achievement. So the states have begun to change their questions. So the problem was these higher thinking and analytical questions created challenges for those students who are culturally linguistic diverse. So there was tests that were being given about U.S. history in Tennessee, and there were 50 question tests, but then they added additional written response at the end. What was the reason for restructuring their standards assessment? So there's this grant called the Race to the Top, RTTT competitive grant. The grant encouraged students to align changes and adapt their assessments with the Common Core state standards. So why? What was the purpose? And most of the purposes was to make sure and encourage that instruction and interpretation skills were being brought up and used instead of just memorization and retention. This exam is taken during 11th grade, but studies show from Mencken in 2010 that the academic language demands of the state assessments obstructs EL's potentials to respond item correctly. So that, like I said, these questions have 50 questions, and the additional written response counts for 1/3 of the overall grade. So negative impact that this has for ELs is that the tests later show that non-ELs are outperforming English language learners, and this prioritized English proficiency of all subjects and all levels. English language learners are put on a disadvantage when taking any types of test assessments. So home language surveys are given to any student at any school district, and these are 3 questions that determine the origin language of the student. If all 3 questions conclude that English is the student's primary language, further screening is not required. But if one or more questions indicate other language than English, the student is administered to class instructional design and assessment. ELL services. During placement tests, if a student scores 5.0 or higher, they are not eligible for services. If they score 5.0 and below, they are. When classified as needing English learning services, the ELL teacher and classroom teacher develop an individual learning plan, which I think is pretty incredible, and I want you to remember that individual learning plan on our next slides. So the next thing we're going to talk about is teacher accommodations. This article was talking about surveys that they gave to their teachers in Pennsylvania. It was 213 teachers, 10 school districts, and it was not just English and reading subjects, but this was math and science. So subject problems that were faced in this is that math and science teachers tend to not know proficiency language of their language learners. They begin to decrease the accommodations of students or do not give any accommodations for their ELL students. Most surveys reported teachers that giving math and science tests to ELs in regular classrooms of all proficiency levels. So teachers should and must make changes. And this survey also said that only 3 teachers provided dictionaries such as like language, English to whatever language the student knows, and 96% of them only spoke English fluently. So data and analysis that they can take is number 1, screening for inclusion, number 2, specific accommodation implementation for the students, and number 3, teacher educational background. So the results showed that 65% of math and science teachers reported they were not aware of their ESL student proficiency scores. So my personal reflections, what can teachers do? Actions that we must take are assessing their previous background knowledge and current performance levels, find their strengths, find the students' big windows and where we can help them more to grow in their weaknesses, understand their needs, plan effective language and literacy instruction. Don't just allow the student to sit in the back of the classroom with a coloring sheet or have a question instead of having math problems be like 3 plus 5. They know more than that. Provide supplemental intervention and support English learners. There's a quote from this article. It says, ELs have complex histories that make it more difficult to determine a specific individual appropriate instruction. They may not be given core instruction that considers both language and learning academic needs. What can I do in my future classroom? So in my future classroom, I want to be alert. I want to be informed, prepared for my English language learners. I know that as I study more of these questions and articles and inform myself and get involved in my students' career, I will be able to help them. This article presented guidelines and assessing the steps to take before the ELs enter my classroom. This included having to know their previous learning experiences, their background knowledge, and having their current placement. I also liked how one of the slides I mentioned said to work with their English language learning teacher and their regular classroom teacher. I think that is a big key factor. Finding out their strengths, understanding their needs, and building a family student teacher relationship. When we build that family student relationship, this can be taken just from the classroom to the home. It doesn't just have to be a classroom setting thing. It was astonishing how some educators in different subject fields were not informed of EL students' English proficiency score. I don't agree with exempting or watering down their assessments. Providing them means of translation from pull-out language teachers or a bilingual dictionary or any other accommodation should be more than enough, and if needed, more can be given. There are current changes happening frequently that can help provide assistance for both teachers and students. So that was my presentation. Thank you for watching it, and here are my works cited.